Trump had the cameras, the platform, and the power, but all it took was one line, just one, from Rep. Jasmine Crockett, to send him spiraling, live, on the record. It happened fast. Blink and you'd miss it. No warning, no build-up, just the clean, cold slice of a sentence that cut through the static like a razor. You signed this, didn't you? Crockett sat upright at the long wooden desk of the House Oversight Committee, her tone quiet, but piercing. She held up the thick white document, its pages clipped neatly, the kind of paperwork that usually got skimmed if not ignored. Her voice was calm, measured, surgical. Because based on your recent statements, it doesn't seem like you understood a single word of it. Silence. The packed room. Journalists, aides, committee members seemed to freeze. A few glanced at their notes. Others looked at her. Most didn't move at all. They just watched her hold her ground. Watched it go live. Beamed into homes across the country. No shouting, no finger pointing, just truth, suspended in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Crockett didn't blink. Her voice didn't waver. And if you looked closely, you might have caught something flicker in her eyes. Not arrogance, not glee, certainty. The kind that comes not from guessing, but from knowing. CNN cut away. MSNBC followed. Fox stayed, wide shot, scrambling to pivot. But the damage, or clarity, depending on your politics, was done. Because this wasn't just a political jab. It landed deeper. An uncomfortable question, long whispered, now shouted in silence. Did he even read the things he signed? The moment cracked across social media like dry twigs. Clips exploded on X, formerly Twitter. One video slowed to show Trump's signature. Another juxtaposed his past statements against the document now in Crockett's hands. Some laughed. Others didn't. This wasn't a gotcha. This was something worse. A breach. A confirmation. Unspoken but unmistakable. That maybe, just maybe, the man who once held the nuclear codes hadn't understood the briefings that came with them. Maybe never did. Back in the hearing room, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't let the chair redirect her. She simply added calm as before. I think the American people deserve leaders who can read the fine print before they sign the future. That was it. Not the document, not the jab, the weight behind it. She never said he couldn't read. She didn't have to. The insinuation was electric, crackling with consequence. Down the hall, aides murmured, some impressed, others appalled, but no one denied it. Crockett had turned a committee hearing into a national reckoning, and she'd done it without raising her voice once. At Mar-a-Lago, the hearing hadn't even adjourned when the yelling began. In a cream-colored private room, Trump shot up from his leather armchair. The remote clattered to the floor. The muted TV froze on Crockett, mid-sentence, document in hand. But he wasn't looking at the screen. He was pacing. Who the hell let that through? He barked, voice rough. She said I didn't read it. On live TV. Silence. 3 aides, 2 suits, 1 open laptop, all looking at each other like kids caught stealing. She embarrassed me. That was coordinated. One younger aide tried to speak. Trump cut him off with a flat hand. I want to know who put my name on that document. I never saw it. I didn't approve that language. But he had. The document was tied to an initiative he'd boasted about months ago. Now it was back, with teeth. She knew what she was doing. He muttered, almost to himself. She practiced that line. A longtime advisor, Glenn Borkin, stepped forward. Sir, he said carefully, you signed it at the rally in Fort Wayne. You called it the best document anyone's ever drafted. Trump turned slowly. Are you saying I didn't read it? No, I'm saying you approved it. On camera, we have footage. Then she ambushed me. His voice sharpened again. This was a setup. She's trying to humiliate me." Borkin said nothing. He knew that tone. That quiet, gravelly simmer meant the anger had rooted deep. Trump sat again but couldn't sit still, legs bouncing, fingers tapping. "She thinks she's smart. She thinks I'm stupid." He grabbed his phone, opened Truth, Social, and started typing. Fast, raw, unfiltered. Nobody stopped him. But after a few furious seconds, he paused, blinked, then handed the phone to Borkin. "Fix the spelling. Make it hit harder." Borkin scanned the draft. Scattered, rambling, half-spelled names, repeated words. But the message was clear. He'd been rattled, and no edit could change that. She's a disgrace. No class, lied on TV, should be kicked out. Everything she said, defamatory. That document was fake. Everyone knows I'm a reader. Best reader. Ask anyone. Trump was speaking fast, agitated, his voice rising and cracking. Top grades. Way better than Biden. Way better. I've signed millions of papers, all legal. Borkin didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He just deleted a few words, fixed the spelling, and passed the phone back. But the issue wasn't the grammar. It was the tone. Across the room, Dana, who ran rapid response, was already texting the media team. "He's making it worse," she typed. "This is going to go viral, and not in a good way." Trump skimmed the cleaned-up post once, then hit send. He leaned back, still fuming. "Let's go after her," he said. "Find something, anything." That sentence changed the air in the room. Colder now, heavier. Everyone recognized the tone. Not just anger, not just embarrassment. Retaliation. Borkin and Dana exchanged a look, a small nod. But neither moved. Because what do you really do when your boss, a former president, demands a smear campaign out of pure ego? What do you do when, somewhere deep in your gut, you suspect she might have been right? Worse, what if people start to believe her? But while Trump unraveled behind closed doors, the real fire had already caught in public. The hearing was still live when the first clip hit, just 14 seconds long. Jasmine Crockett. The document. The pause. Then the line. "Because based on your recent statements, it doesn't seem like you understood a single word of it." By the time the session adjourned, it had been reposted over 50,000 times. Hashtags lit up. Trump can't read, far Crockett clapback, just oversight showdown. Then came the remixes. TikTok set to trap beats. Crockett's lines synced to bass drops. One video, photoshopped Trump's face onto a spelling bee contestant blinking in confusion. It wasn't just the burn that made it viral. It was the silence after. That loaded, chilling silence people felt even through their screens. They leaned in. They rewound. They watched again. It wasn't all jokes. Cable news didn't know what to do at first. Was it a cheap shot? Was it fair criticism? By evening, the split had formed. One conservative pundit dismissed it as political theater, accusing Crockett of personal attacks. Another said she'd gone too far. Questioning a man's intelligence on national TV crossed a line, but others pushed back. She didn't say he was stupid, a progressive host noted. She pointed out a pattern. When someone signs something and contradicts it later, that's not a mistake. That's negligence. But the real shift wasn't in the headlines. It was in the comments. Not the usual screaming matches. Something quieter. People who didn't usually say anything were starting to say something. "I don't care who you voted for," one man wrote in a viral thread. "If my boss signed a multi-million-dollar deal without reading it, they'd be fired. Why are we okay with this from a former president?" Someone replied, Because half the country doesn't expect him to understand the paperwork. They just want him to sound angry while he signs it. That thread sparked a storm. Thousands of replies, some fiercely loyal, some deeply unsettled. That was the shift, not the memes, not the edits, the doubt. By midnight, every major outlet had clipped the moment into their coverage. Was it a gaffe or something more? There was no consensus. In suburban Dallas, a woman named Elena sat on her couch, replaying the clip for the third time. She wasn't political, voted for Trump once, skipped the next election. She thought he was rough but strong, a fighter. Her husband couldn't stand him. She used to shrug it off, but watching Crockett call him out like that, it hit differently, not because of the words, because of what followed. He didn't answer. Not then, not later. Just silence. And then a frantic Truth Social post that read like a fourth grader's tantrum. She looked over at her teenage daughter scrolling TikTok. "Did you see this?" Elena asked, holding up her phone. Her daughter didn't look up. "Everyone saw it, Mom. It's everywhere." And it was. Grocery store lines, group chats, cable news, kitchen tables, one sentence, a shift. And suddenly, America wasn't laughing or shouting. It was listening. Coffee shops, group chats, conservative circles. They were split, some doubled down, insisting it was smoke and mirrors, just another distraction. But others, even in whispers, started admitting what they'd avoided for years. Maybe the guy who said he had the best words never actually read them. A former staffer speaking anonymously to a local reporter put it plainly. "I've seen him sign things without flipping a single page. He just wants to get to the cameras." It didn't make national headlines. It didn't have to. Screenshots flew across the internet like sparks. That one sentence stuck. By morning, Jasmine Crockett was on 3 different networks. No gloating, no apology. Just the same quiet conviction. If signing a document means nothing to you, then leadership means nothing to you. But while the internet argued, something messier was unraveling behind closed doors. Inside the very team that had worked overtime to keep this exact moment from happening. At Mar-a-Lago, the walls weren't cracking. They were splintering. The morning after the clip exploded, Trump's inner circle gathered early, hoping to regroup before headlines. Buried them. They met on the 2nd floor, in the glass conference room no one liked, the one with the long table and thick drapes that trapped heat and tension. 8 people showed up. 2 comms advisors, a speechwriter, a legal liaison, a fundraiser, the campaign manager, and 2 junior staffers who mostly took notes and stayed. Quiet when things got tense. The mood, wreckage. "He looks unhinged," said Colleen Darrow, senior PR. That post made it worse. The typos alone gave them everything. "You think Crockett planned it?" asked Ray Mengen, the young strategist, in sneakers. "It felt too smooth, like she knew where to hit." Colleen didn't hesitate. "She didn't plan it. He handed it to her. All she did was pull the trigger." Silence, the kind that makes you wish someone would fake a cough just to break it. Finally, from the far end of the table, Glenn Borkin spoke. "He doesn't want any of us on camera. Not today. Maybe not for a while." That sent ripples through the room. "Wait. What? You're saying we're going dark?" Glenn nodded. "He doesn't trust the messaging. Says we're too careful, not defending him hard enough." Ray leaned back, arms crossed. "How are we supposed to defend him when we don't even know what the hell was in that document?" All eyes turned to Risa Feldman, the legal liaison. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her voice was low, measured. It was a tax-related initiative, Signed during a private briefing in Indiana. He got a 2-page summary. The full doc was 42 pages. He never asked about the details. Colleen leaned in, almost whispering. Did he read anything? Risa didn't flinch. No. We tried. But he didn't want to waste time with numbers. That was it. The sentence they'd all danced around. For years. The quiet truth. They'd built an entire ecosystem around a man who wouldn't read. Summaries, bullet points, color coding. In their world, skimming was reading. Nodding was comprehension. Now that illusion had cracked. Publicly. And there was no one to blame but the man at the top. Deborah Quinn, the campaign manager, finally spoke. Sharp, blunt, no frills. We have to assume this isn't the last hit. Crockett made him look weak. Worse. Careless. If someone else brings receipts, we're toast. Ray looked to Glenn. What's his mood? Glenn hesitated. Paranoid. Thinks Crockett has more. Thinks someone leaked the doc to her. Said, and I quote, she's working with the deep files. Deborah blinked. What does that even mean? Glenn shrugged. No idea, but he's convinced the walls are closing in. He's using that word again. Betrayal. The room went still. Because in Trump's world, betrayal didn't just mean fired. It meant blacklisted, attacked, humiliated, publicly. And every person in that room had signed NDAs he likely never read. Colleen crossed her arms. We can't keep this going. Not like this. We're running a campaign for a man who won't read. What he signs attacks anyone who points it out and wears it like a badge of honor. Deborah nodded. If he wants loyalty, he has it. But he better not mistake loyalty for silence. The room shifted. Not loudly, but irrevocably. Doubt wasn't a whisper anymore. It was strategy. From the back, one of the junior staffers, silent until now, finally spoke. What happens if Crockett goes back on TV? No one answered, because they all knew. If she did, if she kept pressing, it wouldn't just be a viral moment. It would become a national mirror. One too many people might finally be willing to look into. And while cracks grew in private, Crockett's past was quietly stepping forward, revealing that this wasn't just politics for her. Before Congress, before the spotlight, Jasmine Crockett had a tiny law office above a payday loan center in Texarkana. No marble floors, no campaign banners, just a squeaky swivel chair, stacks of case files, and a second-hand desk with a drawer that jammed if you pulled too hard. Most of her clients couldn't pay. Some didn't even try. But every morning she showed up. Hair tied back, coffee in hand, heels clicking across worn linoleum. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was answering calls no one else would take. Protective orders, evictions, cases no one had time for. She spoke fast in court. Judges didn't like drawn-out arguments. And when you're defending someone making $12 an hour, time is a luxury nobody has. So when people watched her at the hearing, calm, poised, confident, what they didn't see were the years that built her spine. They didn't see the mornings her car wouldn't start, the clients who brought garbage bags of receipts, the court clerks who rolled their eyes at her filings, because she was young, black, and unapologetically loud about both. They didn't see the arguments, the ones she had with landlords trying to evict single mothers while still cashing their rent checks. They didn't hear the man in court who once asked her, "Did you actually go to law school, or did they just let you in for diversity points?" But she remembered. And when Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing room, paper in hand, voice steady, those years didn't drag her down. They honed her, because Crockett wasn't there to land a punch. She was there to expose a pattern that had haunted her since the first day she opened her tiny law office. Powerful people signing documents they didn't bother to read because they knew they'd never suffer the consequences. She'd seen judges skim affidavits, landlords adjust numbers and hope no one checked, banks write 20-page contracts, hiding fees 5 layers deep. And she'd seen her clients, tired, underpaid, out of time, sign those papers with blind faith. So when Donald Trump signed a federal document without reading it, then dismissed its contents on live TV like someone else was to blame, to her that wasn't just incompetence. It was familiar. It was the same system. It reminded her of every scared tenant who sat across from her desk, gripping a letter they didn't understand, whispering, "Can I lose everything over this?" The answer was often yes, but Trump would never hear that answer. He'd never be evicted. Never be handed a court summons while walking his kid to school. Never feel that sickening burn in your gut when you realized you'd signed something you couldn't undo. So yes, Crockett had waited, not out of strategy, but discipline. Because for her, timing wasn't about virality. It was about impact. When she looked him in the eye and asked, "You signed this, didn't you?" She wasn't just talking to him. She was talking to every person watching who had ever trusted someone with more power to read the fine print. And when she added, "It doesn't seem like you understood a single word of it," she wasn't questioning his literacy. She was challenging a culture that excuses ignorance in the powerful, but punishes it in the poor. That's why her voice didn't shake. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew exactly what it would cost. The death threats came fast, voicemails, DMs, anonymous rage. One caller said, "You don't talk to a man like that on live TV," but Crockett had heard worse. She flagged the threats, forwarded them to security, and went back to work. The next hearing was already on her calendar. The next stack of reading was already on her desk. And if Donald Trump didn't want to read what he signed, she would, because as fierce as her conviction was, what came next gave her more than principle. It gave her proof. The document, 42 pages double-spaced, looked standard, stamped, dated, signed with that signature that looked more like a logo than a name. The kind of thing staffers usually summarized with a one-pager and a handshake. But on page 19, something was buried. Something that didn't match Trump's public stance. Not even close. It was about tax breaks. Specifically, the quiet reversal of protections. And it was about to give Crockett more than a soundbite. It was about to give her a cause that even the public couldn't ignore. Buried on page 19 was the clause. Dry, technical, but unmistakable. It lifted the cap on specific corporate deductions, giving massive leeway for large companies to write off far more than before. Particularly when it came to executive bonuses, disguised as performance incentives. Most Americans wouldn't recognize the terminology. But in policy and finance circles, it lit up like a flare. And when Crockett held up the document live on air, she knew exactly what she was pointing at. The scandal wasn't just that Trump had approved a tax loophole. The scandal was that just a week earlier, during a town hall in Reno, he'd gone on a tirade against the very thing he'd just enabled. On camera, word for word, he called such loopholes legal theft, accused CEOs of robbing working Americans, and promised to close every last one. And yet there it was, his signature, authorizing the expansion of the same loophole he had publicly vowed to kill. Whether he'd read the document or not didn't even matter anymore. The contradiction was now in black and white, and Crockett had handed it to the nation in prime time. Within 48 hours, journalists began tearing through the document. Policy analysts on CNBC and Bloomberg broke it down section by section. "This isn't just inconsistency," one anchor said. This is hypocrisy, with real economic impact. Because while the bill cloaked itself in middle-class language, its true beneficiaries were unmistakable. Corporations with clever lawyers, executives with bonus plans. The loophole meant bigger checks at the top and wider tax burdens at the bottom. Small business owners, sole proprietors, family shops, none of them qualified for the same treatment. Roofers in Arizona, dry cleaners in Ohio, hardware store owners in western Pennsylvania. They watched. They saw the numbers. And it hit differently than the usual Beltway drama. It hit personal. In Lorain, Ohio, a landscaper named Javier Ortega sat at his kitchen table with the news playing in the background. 7 employees, 2 pickup trucks, and a backlog of jobs booked through July. "I thought he was on our side," he muttered, flipping the remote. His wife didn't look up from the counter. He said he was. "Yeah," Javier said quietly, rubbing his temples. And then he signed that. Just like that, the conversation began to change. In homes like Javier's, in barber shops, church basements, American Legion halls. It wasn't about the insult anymore. It was about trust. People who had been told that Trump was their voice were now staring at legal language that made clear they were never the intended audience. They were just the backdrop, and that stung. A former Trump communications staffer who had left 6 months earlier spoke anonymously on a podcast. "We used to rush documents in front of him. The team learned early. The less he had to read, the more likely he'd sign. He trusted whoever handed it to him. That's just how it was." When asked if Trump even knew about the tax clause, she didn't hesitate. "Doubt it. But at some point, it's your name. It's your pen. You don't get to say, 'Not my fault,' when your signature is at the bottom." That quote spread fast. People reposted it with their own stories, leases they hadn't read, job contracts with missing benefits, loans with buried fees, times they'd trusted someone and paid for it. And for once, they weren't laughing at Trump. They were seeing themselves, except he walked away richer. They didn't. But while the public tried to make sense of what this signature really meant, the online backlash twisted fast. By Friday, something had shifted, not on cable news, but in smaller, more potent places. Small-town radio, Facebook groups, church bulletins, places where opinion doesn't swing from headlines, but from repetition. And one phrase kept surfacing over and over. "He didn't read it." At first, Trump's base roared back, loud, loyal, rehearsed. Crockett was a grandstander. The media was cherry-picking. Some even claimed the document was fake. But for the first time, something cracked. In a diner outside Tulsa, 2 older men sat at a booth. One cut into his pancakes and asked, "You really think he didn't know what was in that thing?" The other shrugged, sipped his coffee. "I'm starting to think he doesn't know what's in any of them." That wasn't rebellion. That was doubt. And doubt, once it lands, grows fast, especially when it's echoed by people you trust. In Kansas, a conservative pastor included it in his sermon. A warning about leaders who sign with pride but lead with ignorance. He didn't name names, but everyone knew. A sheriff's deputy in Utah, speaking off the record, summed up what many were starting to feel. "I've always supported him, but I wouldn't let a rookie in my department sign something they hadn't read. Why should I excuse it here?" Even conservative talk radio began to shift. "I love the guy," said one host during a Tennessee call-in segment. "But if he didn't read that bill, that's on him. It's not the media's job to babysit the president. It's his signature. He owns it." The change in tone didn't come from outrage. It came from disappointment, a subtle erosion. And while others scrambled to make sense of the fallout, Crockett didn't flinch. She went on NPR, calmly walking through the document's contents, then on PBS, where she laid out the timeline, Trump's signature versus his public denials. She never shouted, never insulted, just repeated one truth. When you have power, you have a duty to read what you sign. Otherwise, you're playing games with people's lives. That line landed, even in unexpected places. A Republican congresswoman from Arizona released a careful but pointed statement. All lawmakers should be held to the same standard of accountability, regardless of party or position. Translation: I'm not defending him, but the most powerful responses didn't come from politicians. They came from culture. A retired Marine posted a video in his backyard, holding a weathered copy of the Constitution. It racked up over 2 million views in a single day. I read this in boot camp, every page, every damn word, because I had to swear to defend it. I didn't ask for bullet points. If you want to lead this country, if you want people like me to trust you, you better read the damn papers before you sign them. The comments exploded. Veterans, teachers, small business owners, even longtime Trump voters. Some were angry. Most were just tired. Tired of defending things they couldn't explain. Tired of pretending this was normal. For the first time in a long while, accountability didn't feel like a congressional formality. It was coming from living rooms, lunch breaks, phone screens, from people quietly saying, "You know what? She's right." But the hardest blow came from a name no one expected. Melinda Rausch, Trump's former education advisor, a woman who once stood behind him at rallies, praised his straight talk, called him a once-in-a-generation disruptor. She went live on a podcast with a confession that echoed across both parties. "I've written hundreds of memos for him," she said, "and we always kept it short, loud, and digestible, because he didn't have the patience for nuance." Then she looked straight into the camera and delivered the line that made headlines. "That's fine when you're selling hats, but not when you're signing policy." That quote spread fast, and suddenly people who'd brushed off Crockett as partisan began listening. Because now it wasn't just her. It was people who had stood beside him, now turning around and saying, "We saw this too." But while the public digested the implications of trusting someone who might not read what he signs, Trump was preparing to strike back in the only way he knew how. It was 11:26 p.m. Eastern. Trump, alone in his Mar-a-Lago suite, eyes red from pacing, had finally lost patience. His aides had tiptoed all week. Too cautious. Too slow. They wouldn't give him what he wanted. He didn't want edits. He wanted blood. So he grabbed his phone, cracked his knuckles, and opened Truth Social. The feed was already a wildfire. Supporters demanding a response. Others taunting him, daring him to shut her down. He clicked New Post and began typing. "Jasmine Crockett is a liar and a fraud. Didn't read the doc. I wrote the doc. I have the best comprehension skills. Way better than Sleepy Joe or Barack Hussein. I sign legally binding documents all the time, every day. She should be removed from Congress immediately. Yes, Jasmine Crockett. And yes, immediately." By midnight, it was live, raw, unfiltered, furious. And the internet exploded. One user reposted it with the caption, "Sir, are you okay?" Another underlined every misspelled word in red, mocking his claim of best comprehension skills. The memes came fast. A photoshopped comprehension champion trophy with Trump's face on it. A kindergarten classroom with Trump sitting front row, holding a phonics book upside down. One post simply said, "He wrote the Diosk. He can barely spell doc." But what really blew things open was his insistence that he had written the document. That changed everything. Fact-checkers pounced. Political analysts pulled legislative records. Within hours, it was confirmed. The document had been drafted by a policy team, reviewed by legal counsel, and summarized in 3 pages before being handed to Trump. There was zero evidence he had written a single line. The verdicts came in fast. Pants on Fire, PolitiFact 4, Pinocchios, Washington Post, Categorically False, AP, and once again, it wasn't just the media piling on. It was regular people, fed up with being asked to believe the unbelievable. By the next morning, it wasn't just about reading anymore. It was about lying, blatantly, carelessly, and in a way so easy to disprove, it made people stop and ask, why even say it? Even his own supporters didn't get it. In a private Facebook group with nearly 200,000 members, a longtime loyalist posted, "I love Trump, but why say you wrote it? It doesn't help anything. It just makes us look stupid." That comment got more likes than the original post. Even conservative influencers began to backpedal. A popular right-wing podcast host, usually a ride-or-die defender, opened his next episode with a rare moment of candor. "I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that post helped. It didn't. It made us look unserious. It gave Crockett more ammo. He needs to stop posting when he's mad." And while the right scrambled to regroup, Crockett stayed silent. No victory lap, no retweet spree, no smug press blitz, just quiet professionalism. Her team released a short statement the next afternoon. "We encourage all elected officials to fully read and understand the documents they sign. We do not respond to playground insults." That line hit hard, not because it was loud, because it was measured. No name-calling, no shouting, just calm, surgical dismissal. And in that stillness, Trump's rage only looked more chaotic. Inside, his own camp, the cracks widened. Colleen Darrow, the PR advisor, finally broke. "We can't fix this," she told Borkin over speakerphone. "Every time we put out a fire, he throws another match." Borkin didn't argue. He just sighed. "This one's different. This one makes people feel stupid for defending him, and that was the gut punch, because by now, it wasn't even about the document. It was about what his words said about them. The supporters, the surrogates, the voters who told their friends. He gets it. He's sharp. He's on our side." Now they were staring at a post that read like someone faking a book report on a novel they never opened. And deep down, many were asking the question Crockett had only implied. What if he's not actually paying attention? What if we've been carrying a man who's never carried the details? What if this is just who he's always been? The jokes still flew. The memes still landed. But beneath the laughter, a deeper shift was beginning. It didn't hit all at once. It crept in like a slow realization. The moment when a joke doesn't land the same way the second time. The hashtags faded. The hot takes cooled. People moved on, as they always do. But something lingered. Not the outrage, the unease. That quiet, nagging feeling whispering, "This shouldn't be normal." Not because one politician lied. Not because one policy was misunderstood. Those things happen. But because someone calm, credible, and utterly unshaken had stood on camera and said aloud, "The man who held the highest office in the land might not even understand what he signed." And no one could honestly say she was wrong. For many, it wasn't even about Trump anymore. It was about us. How easily we let things slide. How we let charisma stand in for competence. How we stopped asking hard questions as long as the answers sounded good. It made people look inward. In Sacramento, a high school civics teacher printed out the document Crockett held up. She passed it around and asked her class to read page 19. Then she played Trump's speech from Reno. "Now compare them," she said. A kid in the back muttered, "So, he lied?" The teacher shook her head. "No, he signed something he didn't, understand? And pretended he did. That's worse." In Alabama, Lionel, a retired factory worker who once phone banked for Trump's 2016 campaign, told a friend over lunch, "We made excuses. We said the media twisted his words. But this was just him, talking," his friend didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. And that's where the real shift happened, not in cable news panels or viral clips, but in private conversations, in text threads and coffee shops, in living rooms where people finally admitted, sometimes for the first time, that trust had been misplaced. Because leadership isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's not about slogans or rage or applause lines. It's about who reads the fine print, who asks questions, who prepares, even when no one's watching. That's what Crockett exposed. Not a flaw in Trump, but a flaw in how we choose our leaders, how we mistake performance for preparation, how we reward attitude and ignore the homework. And it wasn't just the right who felt it. One progressive voter posted on X, "I've dragged Republicans for years, but this made me realize I don't ask enough questions about my own candidates either. We can't keep pretending everyone in power knows what they're doing." The post went viral, not because it was radical, but because it was honest, and that's the word that kept resurfacing. Honest. The uncomfortable truth is most people don't read every line they sign. Most skip the fine print. And most assume the people in charge, the ones with power, are more careful than they are. But what happens when they're not? What happens when they're caught bluffing? For many, this wasn't a gotcha. It was a mirror, reflecting how easily we confuse confidence with competence, and how costly that mistake can be. Some still refuse to believe it. That was fine. Everyone processes truth at their own pace. But even those who dismissed Crockett's moment couldn't ignore what followed. The meltdown, the typos, the retractions, the silence from voices that used to speak the loudest. There was no coordinated takedown, no campaign, just the slow, steady weight of watching someone fall apart under the weight of their own words. There was no grand conspiracy, just one woman, one document, and one question that couldn't be ignored. And it landed, not because it was flashy, but because it was precise, like a teacher handing back a failed test and asking, "Did you even read the instructions?" So what now? Some will keep pretending nothing happened. Others will dismiss it as political theater. But for those who were paying attention, for those who felt that shift, this was a turning point, not just for Trump, but for how we think about power, who we trust, and what we expect from the people signing our futures. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be clear. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So what do we take from all this? Was it just a viral flash? Here, today. Forgotten by the weekend? Or was it something heavier, something that got under our skin? Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. That's what stuck. Not Crockett's tone. Not the viral clip, the discomfort, the quiet realization we've all danced around for too long. The people running things, with pens, platforms, and power, aren't always paying attention. Some skim, some bluff. Some fake it so well we start thinking it's normal. And the scariest part? We let them. Not because we're lazy, but because we're tired. Because politics became theater, and we were told our role was to clap or boo. We picked teams and stopped asking questions. We let charisma replace competence and called it leadership. But it's not. Crockett's moment wasn't about a viral dunk. It was about the danger of pretending the fine print doesn't matter, because it always does. Ask a single mom who signed a lease with a rent hike clause buried on page 5. Ask a soldier who got loopholed out of benefits. Ask a retiree whose savings vanished into a fund they didn't understand. Ask yourself, have you ever signed something you didn't read? And what did it cost you? Now multiply that by 300 million people. That's the risk when the wrong person signs the wrong document. And that's why what Crockett did mattered. Not because it was bold, not because it was viral, but because it was real, because it was simple. A woman who spent her life reading contracts for people with no power stood up and asked the most basic question. Did you even read it? She didn't ask to score points. She asked to remind us what accountability sounds like. Calm, direct, unflinching. That's the bar now. Not perfection, not grandstanding. Just this. If you want to represent people, read the damn document. Know what you're signing. And if you don't, step aside, because someone else will. And maybe they won't chase cameras. Maybe they'll just chase the truth, the details, the job. Here's the truth. As simple as Crockett's question. If we don't demand better, we get worse. And worse? Worse is louder, flashier, messier. But better? Better is steady, prepared, harder to spot at first. But everything, when the pressure hits, that's the lesson. Not just for politicians, for us. We don't have to accept half-truths. We don't have to defend nonsense just because we like the person saying it. We can stop confusing performance with leadership, and we can start asking better questions. Starting with this one. What do you expect from someone who wants your vote? If the answer is, I just want someone who fights, you're not asking enough, because fighting without reading? That's not leadership. That's chaos, and we've had enough of that. So here's what you can do. Look closer. Ask more. Read before you sign. Hold people accountable. Loudly if you must, but clearly. Don't just react, think, speak, show up. And when the next election comes, local, state, national, don't just ask what side they're on. Ask this. Did you read the bill? Do you understand it? Can you explain it when someone like Jasmine Crockett puts the spotlight on you? And if they flinch, stumble, or deflect, you have your answer. Let that guide you. Because this isn't about parties anymore. It's about responsibility. And the next signature could shape your life, your wallet, your family, your rights. So yeah, pay attention. And if this story made you pause, even for a moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, if you haven't already, because more stories like this are coming, and they deserve to be told, plainly, truthfully, and with the care the fine print always demands. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay curious, and above all, stay awake.